My name's Rob Roth. I'm a TV reporter for KTVU in Oakland, and I was a reporter back in '91 and working weekends. The Oakland Hills fire actually started the day before on Saturday. Well, my photographer and I, Nick Soares, were coming from the Cal Berkeley football game, and there was smoke, and so we were asked by our assignment desk to go check it out. So we came up to the Oakland Hills, and it looked as if the fire department had everything pretty well in hand. Neighbors were out. It looked like a pretty typical brush fire. And so we took pictures and talked to people, but it wasn't considered a big deal. We didn't make a big deal about it. The fire department didn't make a big deal about it. And the neighbors seemed pretty calm about what was going on. So the next day, Sunday, I reported to work. Now, Sunday just happened to be the due date for my wife and I's first child, Casey, our daughter, and that was her due date. And we were trying to figure out a way to do a story where I might be able to leave early in case my wife went into labor. So we came up with the idea that up until that day had been a pretty calm fire season. And so I was going to talk about that using the fire from the day before. And then we realized that the Oakland Fire Department was still up in the hills, just kind of putting out hot spots and digging up from the Saturday fire. And we get up there, up around Buckingham Boulevard. The firefighters are very relaxed, and some of them they're curling up their hoses, getting ready to pack up and go. They figured they had this pretty much doused. There was still a few firefighters out on the canyon. I actually went out onto the canyon where the fire had been and did some interviews with firefighters, but they didn't seem very concerned about what was going on. Then around this time, and I would say this was about noon on Sunday, maybe a little before, the wind started to pick up, and they just getting progressively heavier, and they were gusting, and it seemed as if the wind was coming from all directions, not just one. And so there was this one little kind of stubborn, I call it like a campfire sized fire that the fire department was still trying to douse. But as this wind came, it became progressively smokier and smokier, and finally smoke just filled the entire area. The fire department made a hasty retreat. They were called back down. I think there was a brush fire that had started, or maybe another part of the Saturday fire had maybe reemerged. So they left us, and we were, as we do, we were shooting pictures and trying to figure out what was going on as this thing was getting bigger and bigger. And then suddenly we realized that the smoke was so heavy we couldn't see our news car. It was parked around a bend, and we couldn't see it. And this fire's getting bigger, and Nick Soares and I weren't sure if it was safe for us to even try to get to our car. I mean, the car is really going to be our safety outlet. So we've got heavy smoke. This fire is getting larger, and I couldn't see that it had burned any houses just yet from where I was. It very well may have, but I just didn't see that from my vantage point. And we kind of looked at each other like, what should we do? And Nick told me later, he said that I took one step in all four directions at once. But it was a serious situation, and we really didn't know what we should do, because the fire's just getting bigger, it's getting smoky, and behind us is a sheer drop. So we didn't really know what to do. And around this time, a fire truck had come through the smoke, the fire engine had come through the smoke, and the battalion chief, his name was James Riley, he said, "You fellas better hop on." So we hop on, and they just gunned it out of the smoke. And I find out later this was the last vehicle that was able to get out to where we were. So in other words, if they hadn't arrived or we had declined their offer, we wouldn't have made it out. So they gunned it around some curves. They weren't trying to put the fire out at this point. They were evacuating people. So they'd come around a curve, stop the truck. There was 4 firefighters on the engine, and they would go tell people, get out, get out. And this was kind of going on for quite a while, and people would argue with them, and they'd say, no, you have to leave now. So at one point, Chief Riley had gotten off the fire engine, which wasn't a surprise, but he didn't get back on when they were ready to leave, and no one was really sure exactly where he was. And one of the firefighters thought that they had seen his car, his personal car, up in the area, and thought that maybe he had decided to just take his car out. And so that's what we were led to believe, and we would find out later that Chief Riley was killed. He was assisting a resident, and a power line had struck both of them, and they were found later that day or that evening. They were found dead on the sidewalk there. But we didn't know that at that time, that he had died. So the fire truck its way down, and finally we needed to be dropped off. And it was very strange. We were in neighborhoods where just the week before, a coworker of mine, Betty Ann Bruno, had lived on Buena Vista, and she had hosted a shower for my wife, and her street was completely leveled. And like I said, just the week before, she had a party at her house for us. And my sister-in-law's home was destroyed on her street. And I just kept thinking this could be the day that my daughter was going to be born, and here I am in this difficult situation where we weren't really sure if we were going to be able to get out. And then we were able to hook up with some other coworkers, and I was able to do live reports from as best we could. Of course, by this time we were broadcasting straight through. It wasn't just for hour-long broadcasts. It was an all-day event, and I was the only reporter who was sort of behind the fire lines. So I was being able to do stories, and I remember at one point, and this is just kind of speaks to how quickly these fires escalate. I remember an ember had caught my eye, and I was kind of watching it. It was kind of drifting kind of gracefully as the breeze was just kind of gently blowing it, and it landed on the roof of another house. And I'd say within 10 seconds, that house was completely engulfed and gone. Seconds. And I actually found out later that the houses were burning at a rate of 1 every 11 seconds. It's one ember, and think of these thousands of embers that are going. So we finished our day. Nick Soares was not feeling well from the smoke, and paramedics took him to the hospital. They wanted to take me, but I said I wasn't feeling great because we both breathed a lot of smoke. I just felt like I was okay enough where I just wanted to keep going and keep reporting because I was in an unusual situation. So I just kind of, pushed through and was able to to keep reporting. Finally went back to the station, and I went on the air from the news desk. Apparently I had soot all over my face. I didn't even bother to go check to see how I looked. And then I found out later that Chief Riley had indeed died. His funeral was the following week. I couldn't go to his funeral because on that day, that was the day my daughter actually did decide to join us. And I was just being so grateful to have been able to have been there when she was born. Well, 30 years later, it's funny because at the time of the Oakland Hills fire, it was the second largest urban wildfire in U.S. history. And it was certainly in the, upper, huge fire, 3,000 homes and 25 lives were lost. But now, every year there's several fires that either match or dwarf the Oakland Hills fire. And it's just amazing to me how much worse these fires have become, and they devastate entire communities, and as bad as this one, sometimes it hardly registers. I think in the recent history of fires, people, but that day will always. That day is always close to my heart. I like I said, my friend lost her home. My sister-in-law lost her home. Chief Riley is certainly, although I didn't know him personally, he rescued me. But I think about him and his family quite often. So the Oakland Hills fire never really leaves me for very long, and certainly during fire season, when we get into August, September, and October, I just have this dread of what's coming. And I think it's because I was so close to the Oakland Hills fire, that it's not an abstraction, and it's just a really real experience about how devastating these fires are, and how quickly they move, and how loud they are, and how chaotic. I still marvel at how narrow and windy these roads are in the Oakland Hills and in other communities as well, and how they get clogged when people try to evacuate, and it's just, to me, it's just a frightening scenario.